Hey folks, it's me, Dr. Mike Israel for Renaissance Periodization. Should you be concerned about insulin resistance, aka lack of insulin sensitivity, if you are doing bodybuilding or muscle growth training or sports of any kind? So, first of all, what is insulin resistance? In this context, we're talking mostly about what's called peripheral insulin resistance. It's generally when your muscle cells and your fat cells get worse at using insulin to transport glucose from the bloodstream into the cell interior itself. That's what insulin does. It's a transport facilitator. And as your insulin resistance goes up, the same amount of glucose doesn't shuttle through for the same amount of insulin use, and you have to shoot more insulin into the bloodstream via the pancreas to get the same shuttling effect. This is not great for a few reasons. One is it tends to not fill up your cells with nutrients as much, which is a bad deal. The second thing is, generally speaking, as you develop insulin resistance, your muscle becomes more resistant to insulin before your fat cells. If you think this through, that means some way on the way to insulin resistance, your muscles get really bad at absorbing the glucose that hugely stimulates and supports hypertrophy. Also, there's an insulin-mediated transport of a bunch of amino acids as well. So, and also insulin directly is an actual anabolic activator for a bunch of pathways in the cell and a huge activator of anti-catabolism. So when insulin locks into its receptors, it actually tells the muscle cell to stop degrading its structure as much as it normally does. If this isn't happening as much in muscle cells, you're going to be less prone to gain muscle and more prone to lose it. While at the same time, the fat cells are still fairly sensitive, which means all the stuff in your bloodstream that the insulin's not gobbling up to go into your muscle cells is more likely to go into your fat cells, which is a really bad deal. It just, insulin resistance makes you less muscular and more fat. Holy shit. That's a bad deal. And after a while, if it happens for a long time, your pancreas produces more and more insulin to compensate because you can't get nutrients into the cells. Your body's pretty sensitive to that sort of thing. It starts to increase how much insulin it shoots into the bloodstream to get those nutrients into the cells. And at some point, it can actually overstress the pancreas. It's trying to produce too much insulin. Pancreas decides to smoke its last cigarette and die of old age, and then you become diabetic. Formally, you get type 2 diabetes, and that's very, very bad for you. On the way to that, even if you never get to it, you can get what's called prediabetes, which is just mildly elevated blood sugar. But since your blood sugar is mildly elevated sort of chronically, this is very, very, very bad for your health in like a trillion different ways. If you give it a Google of like, how is high blood sugar bad for my health? Oh my fucking God, it'll eventually make you blind. It makes your distal nervous system start to malfunction and die. So you get what's called distal neuropathy, which means like you can't feel your fingertips or toes anymore. A lot of times you'll get a cut on your fingertips and toes and it'll take like forever to heal because the distal parts of your body are sort of dying off. This is a really, really bad deal. Now that's all went well into type 2 diabetes, but prediabetes starts to damage those structures. And for sure, the last thing on your body's priority list is making sure you stay jacked. So if you are starting to get insulin resistant, then getting jacked is kind of fucking out of the equation, and you're just trying to prevent as much muscle loss and fat gain as possible. Real, real, real bad news. So should we be concerned about it, especially as bodybuilders? Well, if you fit the following demographic, then you absolutely, almost certainly don't have to be concerned with insulin resistance. If you're under age 40, if you are training hard and regularly, and you're not obese, which in this categorization will say you are south of 25% body fat as a male and south of something like 35% body fat as a female. Since precisely 1/2 of a female watches this channel, we'll just talk about males from now on. What's up, fellas? Dry shit here, huh? In any case, if you're not close to 25% body fat, 35 for females, if you're 5% lower, if you're like 20% as a male, 15% as a male, etc., you really almost certainly have nothing to worry about because you have tons of muscle, you're really active. It's just not a concern unless you have the worst genetics of all time, and you should kind of know that through family history. And especially if you don't super bulk for like a year straight. So if you maintain relatively remotely athletic, lean physique, and if you are training hard regularly, you train 4, 5, or 6 days a week hard, you get some decent amount of physical activity, you're walking around, unless you have the worst genetics of all time, it's really, really hard to become insulin resistant. And if you super bulk, which means gain like 30, 40 pounds, most of that is fat over the course of like a year straight, you could start to get a little bit insulin resistant. But as soon as you do your first cut, 3 or 4 weeks later, you're not insulin resistant at all. So this is nothing to worry about for that demographic. However, if you're older, especially over 40 years old, and the more over 40 you are, the more this is a concern, and you are on special sports supplements, specifically growth hormone, yes, insulin resistance is a realistic concern for you, and you should do intelligent things to make sure that it doesn't bite you in the ass or your fingers and toes and your eyes, to be more specific. That's fucking disturbing. So if you are older and you are taking, let's say, growth hormone, either one of those actually, even if you're younger taking growth hormone, or if you're older not taking growth hormone, and especially if you're older taking growth hormone, then there are a couple of rules I would follow personally and recommend that you consider that will massively reduce your chances of developing insulin resistance and all the bad things that happen from it. One is I would just never get over 20% body fat as a male and over 30% body fat as a female. Just don't do it. Secondly, if and when you bulk, just cap it at like half a pound per week at most. So like that means that over the course of a 12-week massing phase, you could gain only 6 pounds. That is a good insurance policy to minimize the chances that you develop insulin resistance. You can go faster and risk a bit more. I personally wouldn't. I think that's a bad idea. Stay very active, right? 8,000 steps a day at least on average, more like 10,000 plus would be really even better. And train hard with high volumes. That allows you to, hard training itself stimulates glucose uptake. It clears the bloodstream. It reverses temporarily the insulin resistance. It makes you more insulin sensitive for hours afterwards. And if you stack 6 workouts a week together like that, you're really like doing an anti-diabetic action. The bigger your muscles can be and the smaller your fat cells can be, then the more anti-diabetic, anti-insulin resistance, pro-insulin sensitivity action you're imposing. And that stuff works long-term. So like if you're really big and really muscular and really lean and you're very active, it's just profoundly difficult to be insulin resistant. But if you're the opposite of those things, small amount of muscle mass, high amount of fat mass, you're older, and you don't train much or very hard, you're looking at some decent likelihood that this could be coming down the pipe for you. If you are on growth hormone, very well, I would consider a long-acting insulin like Lantus or something like that to use with growth hormone, at least for some of the time. Definitely when you're massing, in most cases. When you're fat loss phase and growth hormone, you don't have to use it. Potentially doing a workout window insulin as well, like a Humalog or something, especially if you're getting really big, especially towards the end of a mass phase. Probably supplementing with metformin twice a day. I'm not going to discuss dosages on here, but talk to your doctor. Metformin is essentially an insulin sensitizer and is it's a longevity drug. It increases lifespan of animals, kind of all good check marks all around. Stay lean, which means mini cut as needed to stay below 15% body fat as a male and 25% as a female. 15% fat, if you're taking growth hormone, in most cases, just isn't that hard. It's a hell of a drug. And if you take it intelligently and you're not a fat piece of shit with your diet, then you can stay lean, no problem. You don't really have to try hard. But if you take growth hormone, let's say you don't add in some insulin into the equation, you don't take metformin, and you super bulk all the way up to 280 pounds, you're going to have some fucking problems because growth hormone itself causes acute short-term insulin resistance. If you expose your body to that sort of situation all the time, your bloodstream carbohydrate level tends to be elevated over time. It wrecks your body over the long term, and it causes you to be more likely to develop type 2 diabetes in the future. Not some shit you want to do. Growth hormone is this incredibly powerful thing that can keep you way leaner than you thought was possible chronically. Use it for that end. It's one of these things where if you have a race car, you can put race car fuel in it and it makes sense. But if you have a Honda Civic, my preferred car of choice, why the fuck would you put racing fuel in it? Maybe it'll even fuck the Honda Civic up a little bit. The wears and tears in the engine. I don't know anything about cars, just making that up. But it's kind of like, why would you put this exotic material in if you're not living the lifestyle or having the architecture for it? So what I'm saying here is this. If you're going to use growth hormone to be as good at enhanced bodybuilding as you can be, you also have to eat mostly clean, healthy foods most of the time. Can you have a bit of bullshit here and there? Of course. But if you have an only junk food diet and you're just trying to become a sloppy, fat piece of shit, the use of growth hormone with that means you're kind of doubling the probability that you are going to expose yourself to something that ends up causing insulin resistance. It's a bad deal. So when you start taking something like GH, stay the fuck away from like super bulk diets. Bulk slowly, stay lean. Good news, growth will make that easier, but don't get into this insane thing where you're like, oh, I'm 200 pounds. I'll just bulk for the next 8 months to get to 250. Those days are over. That's your natty high school days. You got to bulk to 220 over the next 6 months, and you're going to find out that you can stay super lean and you won't become insulin resistant, and that's kind of a self-solving problem. So there's that. And those are my recommendations, as well as staying very active at minimum of 8K steps a day on average. I would say 10 to 12K on average is a really good thing. Your probability of developing insulin resistance in that case, if you're muscular, you're intelligently using supplementation, and you're very active, gee whiz, training hard, you're very, very unlikely to develop it. But it's something you have to keep your eye on. Here's what won't do much, because if you Google how to treat insulin resistance, and you may find some stuff that's actually just either wrong or highly overstated. There is no avoiding hard training if you want to grow. But if you want to grow the most, your training needs to be hard and smart. RP Hypertrophy app will make sure you're progressing on track, monitoring and adjusting your workout at all times. So for all that work you're doing, you can be sure you're getting the best results. One is people say, well, what about like if I do low carbs on my off days? Won't that create an insulin sensitive environment? It might, but if you raise your fat intake to keep your calories high, then it's actually the way they induce insulin resistance in animal models and in rats, for example, is they just overfeed them saturated fat. They don't even feed them more carbs. So an excess amount of calories exposed to the system is the most contributory thing to insulin resistance. It's not even carbohydrates. It's just calories. So if you're saying, well, I'm going to low carb it, but I got to recover, so I'll eat more fats. And if you say, I'm just going to drop my calories on off days, well, yeah, how the fuck are you supposed to recover and gain mass if you're just like eating almost nothing on your fucking off days? That's kind of stupid. The real thing is to take how many calories you're exposing your body to over time, over weeks and months. Contract that down so it's a mild surplus. And then off days, on days, it ends up in the wash. It doesn't fucking matter, because if you're lean and you're not gaining too much body fat, off day, on day calories make no fucking detectable difference at all. So it's not like you can be 280 pounds, big old gut hanging over, and you're like, yeah, man, fucking doing low carbs on my off days for insulin. Shut up. That doesn't mean any fucking thing. If you lose a bunch of fat, that is the number one way to become more insulin sensitive, is get leaner. It's the most predictable thing I've ever seen in blood work. It's just the fucking miracle. And it's not that much of a miracle. It's kind of obvious. If you eat a shitload of food, you train less and you're less active and you get really fat, your probability of developing insulin resistance really goes up. If you reverse all those things, eat less food, you can still bulk, but bulk slower, stay leaner, train really hard with high volumes, stay active, all of a sudden your probability goes way, 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 way down. If you find yourself at a higher body weight and body fat at some point and you're like, yeah, I really got to clean it up. If you dunk your body fat, if you're a female, closer to 17, 18%, if you're a male, something below 10%, and you stay there for, a few weeks, you are going to insulin sensitize yourself like crazy. So a lot of times getting nice and lean is really a good ticket to making sure that stuff doesn't creep up on you. Another thing that doesn't do shit is cardio after lifting weights, like high intensity interval training or some shit like that. You'll see bodybuilders and other people posting like trying to keep that insulin sensitivity up. So after we hit bench and flies and bicep curls, I did some treadmill stuff. Like, the fuck, what? You have to finish your workout and go recover, which means eating lots of food and lots of carbohydrate and lots of protein. Like, yeah, what about insulin resistance? Well, if you have a high number of steps throughout the day and you're not a fat piece of shit and you train hard, that is all the big check marks you ever have to hit. It's like 2 cardio sessions where you do some hill sprints, 15 minutes twice a week, is a fucking tiny drop in the bucket for insulin resistance if you're eating Taco Bell for all your meals or something like that. So keep that in mind. There's no way to like short-term mini session cardio your way out of this. It has to be a lifestyle, and especially a total body fat situation. Lastly, over-the-counter supplements and herbs, they just don't work all that well, if at all. Right? So some of the over-the-counter supplements have been shown to very marginally affect insulin resistance, but it's always a small amount. And most of them just actually don't do anything as far as we can detect for insulin resistance. So yeah, you gotta, if you're fucking around with growth hormone or something like that, you're gonna have to take a few other drugs to make sure it doesn't fucking kill you in the long term. Well, kills you less quickly. It's still gonna get you one way or another. Lastly, all right, I've scared you guys up enough. How can you tell to what degree, because it's a spectrum, insulin resistance is a spectrum. It's a spectrum of resistance on one end and high sensitivity on the other. You're somewhere on it. How can you tell? Well, just regular blood work that you should be getting once a year or once every 6 months, depending on how hardcore into bodybuilding you are. You can add a test that's pretty much free and covered by all insurance. And if it's not, it costs like nothing, called the glycosylated hemoglobin test. It's also known as the A1C test. And it is a measure of how much excess, or rather, how much blood glucose you had on average every day for the last 3 months, which is really, really awesome, because if you're insulin resistant, it will show you that your blood glucose, because it wasn't fucking going into the cells anymore as much, was like really high. What ends up happening is the glucose, it like looks around, has nowhere to go, and it just ends up attaching itself to various parts of cells. And it actually has these glycosylation branches that are kind of like, it's almost like if you watch like a slow-mo zoomed in version of water crystallizing on like a nail, like super zoomed in on a metallic nail. It like makes these clusters on it, right? And it's same way, but imagine the nail is your blood cell, or red blood cell, parts of which are hemoglobin molecules, and then the extra glucose is like, I got nowhere to go. Might as well crystallize on this fucking cell. And first of all, it's not great that it's doing that, because glycosylation is actually quite deleterious in a variety of functions. Within some normal range is totally fine, but the more intense it is, the worse it is. And if you're diabetic, the hemoglobin is fucking out of this world glycosylated. It's got all these branches on it, not supposed to be there. And there's an index which measures the glycosylation, and it's under 5.2, the value is 5.2, is generally considered good. But if you're under 5 entirely and closer to 4, it's better and better and better. Sometimes if you score low enough, like close to 4, even below, the test comes back as like just null. It's like, we couldn't find anything, so you're good to go. Generally, when I go get my blood work done, that's what I tend to see, is like either they got nothing or it's somewhere below 5. If it's 5.1, 5.2, mini cut time, or real fat loss cut time, something for real, because you don't want that shit going higher. If you get above, 5.3, 5.4, you are now considered pre-diabetic. And sometimes it's the measurements off, so don't freak out too much, but it's time to lose some body fat. And that's the number one weapon you have realistically in managing your long-term blood glucose exposure, is your body fat and your activity level. Ramp up your activity level, ramp down your body fat. Almost every time your blood glucose is going to start behaving much better, and then you're going to have much less chance for developing insulin resistance. Here's the thing. When you're in the normal range and even pre-diabetic, if you change your life around, you can reverse the shit altogether, and there's no real long-term lasting damage. If you end up developing type 2 diabetes, which you'll see A1C scores like 7, 8, 9. I think some people have seen like 15 before. That's like you're just walking, dying while you're walking, like a fucking zombie. Then that really causes some, man, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but like irreparable long-term damage. And you may never have a properly working, until biotech in 10 years cures all this shit. For the next 10 years, you may not have, if you make it that far, you may not have a properly working glucose dynamic system in your body, because you fucked it so hard. There's no unfucking it until genomics heals us all. So anyway, stay sharp. Again, for most of you, not remotely a thing to worry about. But as you get closer to your 40s, and if you're curious, just take a look at your A1C values when you get your blood work done every year or so. And if they're below 5 and well below that, no worries. So, enjoy, live your life. But if they're creeping in above 5 and into the mid 5s, it's time to think about it, and time to do some serious fat loss, serious enhancement of physical activity, and definitely talk to your doctor or medical provider about like, hey, I'm like a little bit concerned about insulin sensitivity. Is there anything I can do to improve it? And they may have some great ideas for you. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Like, subscribe, swipe left or right. I don't know what platform we're on. If you're a new subscriber, hello, welcome. Hopefully you're learning stuff, and we'll see you guys next time for the next video.